Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Chicago-based jazz vocalist Paul Marinaro. He talked at length about his new 2022 CD, Not Quite Yet. It was a long time coming for this actual incarnation of the album, and in his words, he says that this album is an honest and intensely personal collection of songs which address themes and reflects moods that are characteristic of him. Paul has been dubbed as having one of the most beautiful vocal instruments in the business today and has earned Best Performance of the Year in the Chicago Tribune from 2013 to 18. He has quite a story to tell. Enjoy this interview.
Hey, thanks for taking a minute out today.
Oh, not a problem. I'm happy to do it.
I want to get into your latest album, but before we do that, COVID kind of turned the artist world on their head for a couple of years, and I'm curious, how did you survive that time period as a jazz musician, and how has it subsequently changed the way that you go about business now?
Those are loaded questions and great questions. Well, how did I survive it? I think that's twofold. How did I survive it as a jazz musician, and how did I survive it as just a human being? They're similar and different. I think as a jazz musician, it was incredibly difficult because there were just no viable outlets to perform. I've discussed this before. I think it's always interesting whenever a musician or an artist takes a little time off or unexpected time off. It really throws you because, everything in this business is about building a momentum and a trajectory. And once you're on that, good, bad, or indifferent, you kind of follow it and you lose a little sight of how much time is passing because it occupies all your time and energy. And when you're forced to stop, it really throws you because you stop and take notice of just how much time has passed. And you really feel that. You feel that pause. I think maybe a bit more than most professions, at least. That pause feels exponential, and I know it certainly did for me. And this is the second, big pause that I've had in the last, 4 or 5 years. Several years ago, I had gotten quite sick and needed several surgeries, and was pulled out of the game right at a very kind of great time for me. I was doing quite well and starting the tour. I was going to Europe and was kind of pulled out of all of that due to sickness, and spent 2018 recovering, and then really hit hard in 2019, and everything was back on track, and we planned for a lot of projects, and then of course the pandemic hit. So how do you survive? You just, like we all did, you try to get through it. I think the hardest part of it was not knowing, at no given time did we know, well, is this another few weeks? Is this another month? Is this another year? We had no idea how long we were really going to be stuck in it. So in that time, we, like many musicians, we started to do live streaming whenever we could. So I had wires all over my house, and my dining room became a small television studio. So that was an outlet to perform, and people were very generous with donations. So that's really kind of how we hunkered down and got through it.
So your latest album, Not Quite Yet. Talk to me about this album, what it means now, kind of as the world is opening up, chances for live shows. Just in general, how does this release feel for you?
Well, it's interesting because the album had been a long time, a version of this album had been a long time in the planning stages. Like I said, it was originally supposed to happen many years ago. Maybe not this exact album, but a follow-up album. I wasn't able to get to it. I got sick, so it was shelved. Several other things happened to where it got shelved. And then, of course, the pandemic. But the concept of once we were able to regroup and get back into it, I had heard a David Bowie song. After he died, he had a posthumous release, and it was called No Plan. It's hard to, guess what David Bowie ever means in his lyrics because he's never right on the nose. You have to do a little work sometimes. But this, I think, was pretty clear that he was speaking from the afterlife and kind of this idea of being stuck in limbo. And I really latched onto that when we came back to recording this album, because that's what, everything had changed. Even songs that, I definitely wanted to record, they suddenly just took a different meaning to me. They had a different meaning to me during and after the pandemic. I've often said, if that experience didn't somehow change you, I don't know if you were paying attention, because it was, collectively and individually, it was massively difficult. And particularly following, the previous years where, as a country, we're more divided than we perhaps have ever been before. And that was very taxing on us. To be followed by, 2 years of a pandemic was really something. But the idea of being stuck in limbo kept seeming to reach out to me through that song. And then I found other ways to express that. I worked very closely with my guitarist, Mike Elamana. And when we came back to, being able to record the album or plan it, I said, how do you sing love songs when the world is upside down? How do you sing about looking for love or unrequited love? The typical themes that we find in these great songs. They didn't seem at first to me to ring true. I didn't know how to approach them. And then it dawned on me that when you're stuck in limbo, whether it was, me personally being sick, being pulled out of the game, or the individual isolation and loneliness of the pandemic, those songs spoke to me in a different way. And I think with the arrangements that we worked on together and Mike came up with, that's how we kind of approach these. These are the things that we look to, even when we're, put on pause, even though we're stuck spinning our wheels in limbo and not at that next step yet, not quite yet. We're not quite yet there. These are the things that humans look for. They look for relationships. They look for love. They look for, some light out of the darkness. So that's kind of how we planned it. There's a lot of conflicting emotions throughout the album. There's a lot of darkness. There's a lot of light. It's a moody album. It's not a downer, I don't think, but it's certainly moody. But the goal is to kind of all draw these are emotions that I personally went through, and I think that other people can find truth in as well.
Absolutely, I agree. So talk to me a little bit about your beginnings, kind of where you were born and raised, and who were some early influences to kind of give you this desire to be a singer?
Well, I grew up in Buffalo, New York. Usually when people move out of Buffalo, they try to find a warmer climate. I picked the same climate. For some reason, I picked the same exact climate. But I've been in Chicago about 18 years now. And my earliest influence was my dad. My dad had always wanted to be a singer, kind of gave up that dream to raise his family. I'm the last. I was the youngest of a very large Catholic Italian family, so I'm number 10. And oddly enough, I was the one that kind of picked up where my dad left off and followed in his footsteps as far as the type of music. So through my dad, the earliest influence was, of course, Sinatra. And I had heard, as early as I could remember, I had heard these songs as a kid, whether my dad was playing recordings of Sinatra or singing himself. I think what was interesting for me at that age, I never put a date. I didn't realize they were old songs. I didn't realize they were written 50 years before I was born. They were just songs that my dad introduced me to. So I never approached this music or this genre as anything but valid music. It didn't have a shelf life. It didn't have a date. So that's really kind of how I got into this. It was, and my dad had made old homemade acetates. He had saved his money and bought a record cutter in the late 40s. So I heard these scratchy old 78 RPM acetates that I pulled out of the attic when I was about 5. And the first thing I, heard was my dad singing, what was then a new song, that old Black Magic. I was just transfixed by, well, that's my dad on a record. I didn't know that was possible. And, that kind of got me started. So when I started singing, that was the type of material I gravitated towards. And then, through Sinatra, it went into more of the strict jazz singers, obviously the lineage, Ella, Billie Holiday, and was a big Anita O'Day fan. So that's kind of how it spun off. But my dad and Sinatra, either choice, not a bad way to start.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. So talk to me a little bit about the very first live show you ever saw that made you think, wow, that might be something I'd like to do someday.
Oh, man. In growing up in Buffalo, I was kind of a late bloomer to all of this. I was more into theater just accidentally. I didn't really know where to put my interest. I took many years of classical piano, but I really wanted to sing more. So once I was old enough to go, there was, very few choices in Buffalo, New York to go see live jazz. But there was one place called the Anchor Bar, which was known as the birthplace of the chicken wing. So that's kind of where it started. They're famous for that. But every Friday and Saturday they had a jazz trio, and they were playing for a woman by the name of Dodo Green. And she had retired to Buffalo. She was probably pushing 80 at the time. But a great soulful jazz, a great entertainer, just kind of a throwback to an era that I would not have been privy to. And she actually was the first female vocalist recorded for Blue Note. Her career didn't really blossom as a recording artist after that, and it's been reissued probably more so because Illinois Jacquette is playing on the album, so it has some extra jazz value. But I would go every Friday and Saturday night to see her. It just was, she was mesmerizing. And eventually I, would work up I would be brave enough to ask the band if I could sit in. And they routinely shot me down. They said no every week. And one week there was an older pianist sitting in, and he heard me. He's like, "Yes, you sing a little?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd like to." And he said, "Well, I'll play for you." So after break, he, asked me what I wanted to do, and I think the first song I ever sang was "Don't Get Around Much Anymore." And we finished the song. It went well. The club owner invited me over for a drink, and everyone said, "Oh, do you realize who you just sang with?" And his name was Al Tinney. Again, not a household name in the jazz world, but definitely someone who was, he had played for Billie Holiday. He was kind of at the birth of the bebop. He was in New York at that point. And there's a lot of quotes from, Dizzy Gillespie and Max Roach, who said, "Oh yeah, the guy that we all went to was Al Tinney." So it was interesting, and he kind of told me where to go and what clubs to try to sing at, and so that's kind of how I got started. But it really was watching that group at the Anchor Bar with Dodo Green, and I was green enough not to realize how much I didn't know yet. I think that's the blessing of youth. But I would just keep pushing at it and learning more and more and trying different tunes and that whole culture of sitting in and working with different musicians. It's better than any college degree. So I was fortunate to really have that.
So talk to me a little bit about like how your career kind of took off. How did it begin, and how did it take off to where you're at right now?
It's been an interesting journey. I moved to Chicago because I knew at that point that I love New York City. I absolutely love visiting New York City. It's just not a place that I ever saw myself living. And Chicago seemed to be the more affordable, the cleaner, the safer, it just seemed like the easier choice for me. So I just picked up and moved here. Didn't know anyone. Looking back on that, it's very unusual for me because I don't normally take leaps like that. But 18 years ago, I decided that was what I was going to do. And I started working at piano bars wherever I could get a job, and the city was very good to me. And slowly I started meeting a lot of the older, more revered names, and they would kind of bring me on and do a show with me, and that gave me a little bit more visibility. Judy Roberts was an early collaborator with me, and working with her, she, it gave me instant credibility for people who may not have heard me or seen me before. And it really was my first album. I was very late to the game of recording, but I decided that I wanted to pay tribute to my dad. And that's how I'm very much old school, where I love the concepts of albums like that, concept albums that actually have a cohesive theme that runs through them. So I decided my first album was going to be a tribute to my dad and his lost dream of wanting to be a singer. And we opened the album we had those acetates restored groove by groove, so I can get some of the sound out of them. And that's how the album opens, with him singing a cappella as a teenager, that old Black Magic, and then it morphs into our version of it. And we put a few of those little clips throughout it, so it turned it into a concept album. And a lot of people at that time told me, oh, that's a wonderful idea, it's so heartwarming, it's beautiful, but give that to your dad as a private gift, but don't release it, because no one's going to get that. They're not going to understand. Your dad wasn't famous. Those are scratchy old 78s. Why would you want that on an album? And I'm glad I didn't listen. I'm stubborn to begin with, but I really felt that, in the world of streaming and singles and MP3s, where the idea of the album is lost, I thought that this was a reason to pay attention again, that this gave the album a story. So I kept all that in, and it was the right choice, because it was exactly what people connected to. And they listened to the album because it had a story. They listened to the album because it touched them. The story moved them. And then, hopefully the music does as well. But it gave them that reason to listen more closely. And it just got a ton of press. And that really kind of brought me to a different level, and, went to Birdland, did my first show at Birdland and stuff like that. And so that, unfortunately, after that point, there were so many other recordings that were planned, and one thing after the other seemed to life happened, and I wasn't able to get another one done. So it's been 9 years. So this is, I did a live album, but this is only my second studio album from the first, this is the sophomore album, so that also plays into the theme of not quite yet, that idea of being stuck in limbo. So for me, it has many multiple meanings.
Well, and no matter what's happened, you've obviously always loved what you do, and you've been in it consistently no matter what. So what is it that you look forward to the most about being a professional musician? What do you enjoy the most about it?
The collaboration. I really do. It's interesting. Someone in the discussion just last night commented on how much love I give on stage to my sidemen or to any of the musicians that I'm playing with, and they were pleasantly surprised by that. And it took me by surprise that they felt that way, because to me it's a no-brainer. I could be the best singer in the world without the musicians that I'm working with, who are crafting these beautiful sounds around me, and the spontaneity and the collaboration of that. That's what keeps me coming back for more. And I have to say, one of the more touching lessons during the pandemic was that initial worry that if we lose this momentum, if we're pulled out of the game, will any clubs be around? Will the doors be closed? Will people move on? And I really felt worried that audiences wouldn't be there. That they may have just moved on or gotten gotten used to doing other things, and they may not come back, or you question your self-worth as an artist and how much this means to people. And when we started doing the live streams during the pandemic, the emails, the notes, the cards that would come in every week from people saying, you have no idea how much it means to us that you're doing these, because we're sitting here alone and you're bringing this music to us, and it just brightened my day. And over, people were so wonderfully loving and supportive during that time, and it just gave us the sense that, we are important to them. Music does matter. It is reaching people. I don't know that we always, it's such a difficult business. We may lose sight of that sometimes. So it really is. It's just the joy I get out of creating the collaborative effort with other musicians, and it's a small market for what we do, but the people that come out to listen to it and support it, they're really powerful and they're really mighty, and you can tell just how much this music means to them.
I'm going to get a gauge on, kind of the life that you've lived and the wisdom you've gained. Let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into your younger version, your 20-year-old version of yourself, and you could give that version a piece of advice based on the wisdom that you've gained throughout your life. What would you tell your young version?
Trust yourself more. I had a very strong innate gut feeling that pushed me to keep going, but it was always attached with a lot of self-doubt or doubt about the scene, or doubt about how viable it was, which is all valid, because I would probably also tell someone else, be careful. You have to really know what you want, because it's an incredibly difficult business, if there is much of a business left. But I think I would tell myself that gut feeling, that gut drive that I had, it was correct. And maybe a bit more of that with less doubt along the way would have been helpful. So I think I would just tell myself, trust your gut feeling, because you can get there. I did not have the typical initiation into this field like some. I see, some 20-year-olds or 18-year-olds who have already been in trios and formed bands and out there working. I didn't. I was started much later. It was very tentative and I had to feel it all out. I kind of created it as I went along, but I always had this kind of stubborn gut feeling like, no, I think I know where I want to be. I think I know what I want to do. And it was always driven by rather than a vision of level of this is where I want, these are the clubs I want to sing at, this is where I want to live. I didn't have that as strongly as, this is the kind of musicians, these are the kind of musicians I want to work with. These are the kind of arrangements that I'm hearing. That guided me. Even when I didn't have it, I knew that I wanted more. I knew that I wanted a different sound. So it was mostly the music that kind of pushed me forward, rather than a vision of, exactly what type of career I wanted.
So everything's going to come down to this, Paul. Everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you live your life. You have a perception of you. Who do you think you are?
Oh, God. That's the Barbara Walters question, huh?
That's it. This is the therapy.
I'm gonna be as honest as I can be. This album is the most truthful I've ever been musically. My first album was my focus, was me turning the spotlight on honoring my father. This one was me kind of turning that spotlight on myself. And I knew I was doing that, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And when we performed it live just a few weeks ago, for the first time for the album release, we did a big concert, all of the musicians. And I'll be honest, it threw me. I don't know that I expected to go as deeply as I did. And, those are raw emotions. So it is the most honest I've ever been. And who am I and I have no idea. It's all in there. But it really, I have to be honest, it shook me up. It shook me up more. And that's exactly what you're supposed to do. I realize that, and I'm glad that I did. But it's been a process kind of sorting it all out. I don't choose material with a concept of how popular it might be or I know some artists that say, well, if you want to get airplay, you have to record this and you have to do that. Or if you want to be covered by Downbeat, you have to do this. And I don't know what that is. I don't know how to do that. I only know how to do what my gut guides me to do. We did 2 David Bowie songs on the album that really spoke to me. Obviously, the one that the title comes from, Not Quite Yet, comes from the song No Plan. And 5:15, The Angels Have Gone. And I was so lucky to have Mike Alamana, my guitarist and arranger, collaborating with me because he, there's so many jazz musicians. If you say, I want to do a David Bowie song, they're on their way out the door. They don't, they're just, it's outside of the genre and they just, they're not interested in doing things like that. But Mike, as soon as he heard the songs, he got it. He understood why I wanted to sing them. And, at the end of the day, if it's jazz, great. If it's not, great. I'm not concerned about really fulfilling the genre as much as singing material that moves me. So we do have, there's actually a follow-up album that will be out in February. So this is also goes back to what you asked me, how I got through the pandemic. I was busy crafting a lot of projects. I used the downtime to kind of say, as soon as we are able to get into the studio, these are the things we want to do. So there's actually going to be a complete album of reimagining of David Bowie. And that's with the Metropolitan Jazz Octet. I think this is the first time I'm actually announcing that. But yeah, that'll be out on Origin Records in February. But yeah, it's the material that drives me.
Right on. So speaking of material and shows and everything in your world, where's the best place for everybody out there to go to get the new album and to find out about anything about you and any shows coming up?
Right now, I'd say, we're on all the different platforms. The album is on Bandcamp as well, but my website is you can get the album there, and that's paulmarinaro.com. The vinyl is coming, although the vinyl plants are backed up for many months, but there's going to be a vinyl edition as well that'll have a few different bonus tracks. I kind of cheated on that answer, who am I, but they'll have to figure it out. It's in the album.
Well, yeah, and that's good. That's kind of the Bowie idea that you were talking about earlier on.
It's interesting because I think some people may have expected a more celebratory album of, here I am, I'm still standing, and there's parts of that in this album, but it's also here I am, I'm still standing, but things have been damn rough. And I think it's that the artists that I've always admired found ways to turn painful things into beauty. They're no less, they're painful, they're truthful, but there's beauty in that truth. And that's the approach that we wanted to take with this.
Well, Paul, I appreciate you opening up and talking about the album and your life and music. Good luck with everything as we kind of close the year out, move into the next.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure chatting.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest singers and players in Chicago, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Paul for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Every day of every night of every year, born to be blue.
Neon Jazz.